These disasters had a direct political effect. Asquith had lost his own son in the fiasco of the Somme. Now it would cost him his political career. Lloyd George scented blood.
Was Lloyd George plotting? Lloyd George was always plotting. But the first person to stick in the knife was the press baron. Northcliffe asked the editor of the Daily Mail to find the worst possible picture of Asquith and label it "Wait and See," and then the best possible picture of Lloyd George and call it "Do It Now." And in case anybody failed to get the message, he then wrote a headline which read simply, "Asquith, a limpet." Politicians these days who complain about being roughed up by the press should stay in a little more and read some history.
Lloyd George now joined hands with Andrew Bonar Law and forced Asquith to resign. The King invited Lloyd George to form a new coalition government. The Liberal Party was split down the middle and would never really recover. The Tories were now the majority in Lloyd George's coalition.
With no election, this was a wartime parliamentary coup. The socialist Beatrice Webb wrote in her diary that it was brilliant improvisation, reactionary in composition and undemocratic in form. Lloyd George remade British government. A war cabinet of just 5 men oversaw the fighting, while outside this place, British government power spread to undreamt of degrees. The Edwardian age didn't really end in 1914. It ended with what was, in effect, the first parliamentary dictatorship since the days of Oliver Cromwell, the dictatorship of David Lloyd George.
The first year of Lloyd George's parliamentary dictatorship would be a black one. The Battle of Passchendaele on the Western Front was another bloodbath that achieved little. France was crippled, its army mutinous. Russia, one of the key allies, fell to the Germans, and then to revolution. The United States was doggedly refusing to join the war. And most alarming of all, Britain was running out of food.
The food crisis of 1917 was caused by a step change in German strategy. We tend to think of the U-boat menace as a Second World War affair, but actually the submarines were more dangerous first time round. The Germans knew that Britain imported 2/3 of her food and thought that a slaughter of merchant shipping might bring this country to surrender. But there was a problem. To make that effective, they would have to try to sink all ships coming into British ports, including American ships, which meant risking America coming into the war.
Starving and desperate herself, Germany took the risk. And lost her gamble within weeks, for America at last declared war. Now it was a race to the finish. Could the U-boats defeat Britain before American intervention changed everything? It was a close-run thing. Before long, Britain was running out of fuel and food. Prices shot up and long queues formed outside shops.
Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning, though your lads are far away.
This nation of gardeners pulled together. They turned parks and squares into allotments. And the government set up national canteens, serving cheap meals. And none of it was enough. The U-boats continued to slaughter the merchant ships. What could be done?
The answer was staring the Admiralty in the face: organise the merchant ships in convoys. The Admiralty was sure this wouldn't work. A convoy is a lot bigger than a single ship. Once the U-boats found them, there'd be a turkey shoot. Obvious. But sometimes the obvious is wrong. Set against the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, a convoy is not much bigger proportionally than a single ship, almost as hard for the U-boats to find, and you can protect a convoy with warships. The Admiralty was pressed into trying this by, among others, Lloyd George himself, and very reluctantly they agreed to give it a go. As soon as they tried the convoy system, the rate of sinkings dramatically decreased, the food started to come through. This single lateral jump of logic may have saved Britain from losing the war.
The beach at Formby, where the Mersey meets the Irish Sea, was a quiet place, even in wartime. In July 1917, a tall, striking-looking officer was walking here alone.
He stopped by the water, shook his fist at the sky, and then he began to tug at a small ribbon on his tunic, which showed that he'd won the military cross. And he tore it off and let it drop weakly into the water and watched it float away and sink. The man was Siegfried Sassoon, one of the greatest war poets ever and a hero of the trenches. And he was in the middle of the worst crisis of his young life.
Sassoon was in turmoil about the war. He'd been quick to enlist and was a brave and charismatic frontline leader. But he'd come to believe that the war was being fought for the wrong reasons. At home on leave, he wrote a public statement explaining why he felt he could no longer serve.
A war of defense and liberation, he said, had become one of aggression and conquest. I am protesting against the political errors and insincerities for which the fighting men are being sacrificed, he said, and against the callous complacency with which the majority of those at home regard the continuance of agonies which they do not share and which they have not sufficient imagination to realize.
Sassoon's statement was all the more explosive because he was a genuine war hero. Now he was determined to be a martyr. He knew he was risking court-martial, imprisonment, and even execution. Instead, the army tried to discredit Sassoon by packing him off to Craiglockett in Edinburgh, a hospital for officers suffering from the newly diagnosed condition of shell shock.